Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. This is Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the show. The two sponsors are Eco Engineers and Philip Lee LLP. Oh, Eco Engineers. What isn't Eco Engineers? I've had a really great vantage point of carbon dioxide removal. And so often I'll start talking with a company and they will say something like, oh, well, we've been working with Eco Engineers for a while now, either trying to build this methodology or just trying to figure this project out, trying to get the quantification right, trying to figure this MRV out. That has happened to me so many times. And I've been glad to see them have so much success with so many companies in our space. Eco Engineers is essentially a consultancy that helps carbon removal tech and project developers get to market effectively. If you've ever started a company, one of the early decisions that you're going to need to make is which of these things can we bring in-house and which of these things do we need to pay consultants for? And often the conventional knowledge here is that it always makes sense to bring stuff in-house if you can. But I think bringing in very experienced consultants early on can save projects a lot of time and money. For instance, you might end up on the phone with David LaGreca. David's going to be on the podcast soon, and David has done, dozens of methodologies within the voluntary carbon market. And if you could just get on the phone with David for a little bit and you are trying to bring a new methodology or protocol to market, you have some new approach, you're a biochar project and you're trying to figure out, given your technology, region, biomass availability, what is the best way for me to work within the options that I have available to me? That's a person that you could very easily be paired with. David will likely shave off time and money from what would otherwise be a process that is pretty overwhelming. And that's just the start of it too. Eco has been engaged with people I've known or worked with, from everything from project design to the actual MRV plans, doing the LCA itself, registering the project, doing the diligence support, feasibility studies, tech evaluations, market eligibility. I feel like they're halfway to being an EPC without actually being an EPC for some of these things. Sometimes you don't necessarily need one person full-time thinking only about your project. Sometimes it makes sense to get 10 people on a fractional basis who have worked on collectively hundreds or maybe thousands of projects. Whether or not that will be the way for your company to go, you'll have to take the calls to figure it out. And I very much think you should do that. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to get in touch with Eco Engineers. Tell them Ross Kenyon sent you. Philip Lee LLP is a law firm with a lot of experience in carbon markets and carbon removal. If you've been working in this space for really any amount of time, you probably have noticed that you do need competent counsel to do business here. The contracts that get signed are frankly pretty weird. You're going to need help from a lawyer with a red pen. I'm sorry to inform you, your only choice is basically who they should be. And if you are deciding who they should be, you should be considering Philip Lee LLP. They've won Environmental Finance's VCM Law Firm of the Year for the last, since 2023, essentially. It hasn't happened yet for 2026. I imagine they're a contender for it this year as well. They are the largest legal team dedicated to the financing and development of carbon projects globally, and they have offices in the US, Europe, and the UK. One cool new thing I just learned, actually, is that they have been listed as a firm in Chambers Global as a global market leader in the area of climate change. This listing aligns Philip Lee LLP with around 15 to 20 of the leading law firms practicing in this practice area in the entire world. So congrats to Philip Lee LLP. Thank you to Philip Lee LLP for your generous support of the show. You make it possible for me to dedicate so much time to putting out content that I hope is useful to our friends and peers and fellow travelers in the world of carbon removal, climate change, and carbon markets. Thanks so much. Here's the show. Hello. Thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. I'm the host of the show, Ross Kenyon, and I am a carbon dioxide removal and climate tech entrepreneur. If you love the show, could I please ask you very sincerely, give this show 5 stars on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. If it's on Apple Podcasts, you can also write a quick review about why you like this show so much. So this is me looking you in the eye saying, please help the show that ideally you really like by bumping it up, that cruel algorithm, helping it get to more people. It's so helpful and it's such a quick thing to do. You could probably complete the entire thing in under a minute if you did. There's also a Substack that I've been trying to make better use of lately. The link to that is in the show notes. You can find it by searching my name, Ross Kenyon, or Reversing Climate Change Podcast. You will find it. And a follow or subscription there is also very much appreciated. Today's episode is the attempted synthesis of two different articles I wrote for Rainbow, the carbon removal standard and registry. So I've been working with them for several months now. And one of the first pieces that we did was about why Rainbow has such a strong culture of field engineering. As a registry, they are very focused on actually building, deploying, engaging with reality, and working through those tricky problems that oftentimes goes beyond the mere science of how carbon removal projects are conceptualized, but it actually requires quite a bit of engineering work to put these things into practice beyond what science just tells you to do. So I wrote this original piece about why engineering is so core to the culture of Rainbow. And then Rainbow's head of science, Erica Dorr, reached out and it's like, actually, I think there's a number of things here that maybe you took a wrong turn on, or maybe we're presenting this in too binary a sense, because many of the engineers that I know are doing science work. Many of the scientists I know are actually doing engineering work. Carbon dioxide removal is so applied that it isn't the potentially caricatured vision of this that I had presented. I spoke with Erica and she gave me a lot more information about what it means to be a scientist working in an applied field like carbon dioxide removal. Today, I am bringing on the main subjects of each of those pieces to try to weave them back together, get their comments on those pieces. What do scientists actually do? What do engineers actually do? Where are these lines? How does their training impact how they see and solve problems? And that gets into seemingly all of the biggest questions in monetizing carbon, environmental, and climate benefit. Questions about race to the bottom, how much quality is enough, and whether some of the truer points are between the commercial sides of an enterprise within carbon dioxide removal and the engineering and science teams. Representing engineering at Rainbow is Samara Vantil, who is one of Rainbow's environmental engineers. She works on Rainbow's certification team, trying to make sure that project developers who qualify for generating carbon removal credits from within Rainbow's system are able to do so in an ethical and rigorous way. And so she helped me with this first piece that came out early December 2025 called Why Carbon Markets Need Field Engineers, Not Just Scientists. And then it took only a little bit more than a month for the follow-up piece to come back called What Scientists Actually Do in Carbon Removal. And that was Erica Dorr's correction of me, or maybe addendum to my original piece. And she, as I mentioned, leads science at Rainbow. Thank you so much to Samara and Erica both, as well as the team at Rainbow, for being able to have such an open conversation about the tensions about this work, both in this podcast and in the essays. I think it's really important to engage honestly with the work that we have to do and not just say the things that we're all meant to say over and over again. I think it's really important to be asking fundamental questions and to be grappling with where the trade-offs actually are here. I think earnest engagement with the big ideas of climate is a sign of rigor and integrity, and I always love when I see that. So thank you so much to Samara, Erica, and the Rainbow team. It's been really a pleasure working with you and being able to pick the brains of your colleagues and your project developers, and I'm hoping to do much more in the future. The links to these essays and to Rainbow itself are in the show notes if you'd like to learn more. Thanks so much for listening, and here's the show. Samara and Erica, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. Always like a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, thanks. We had a lot of fun working on these articles. Started off working on one about, putting scientists back in their place and just cutting them down to size. And then getting hit back by the science team here and trying to find appropriate balance. These are like the most basic questions of all, but perhaps the most difficult. What is science and what is engineering? And what actually is the difference between these two disciplines?
Oh man, I would say the most high level difference that maybe as a cliche is science is the pursuit of knowledge or creating knowledge. And engineering is all about taking that knowledge and turning it into solutions or making real world physical change, like creating things and building things with it. That's the most high level definition I think of. What do you think, Samara? I totally agree with exactly what Erica mentioned. Like, usually, like, science is the one that is building all the knowledge foundations, and the engineering, like the engineers, are the ones that take this foundation and apply into real world case scenarios to solve problems, basically.
Hmm. Okay. I think, what was the word that you used for this, Erica? You said all models are lies, but some are useful. And maybe this way of understanding the difference between science and engineering is a case of this. Why isn't this the whole story? Or why is that a useful starting point, but maybe not where you should conclude?
Well, it's a stereotype and a cliche, and stereotypes are useful as a shortcut or a fast forward to understanding the big picture. They're like a shorthand for us, but of course there's more nuance to that. Is that I think science and engineering, it's not so much about a role or a inherent, characteristic of one person, like their approaches really, and most people, I would say good scientists or good engineers exhibit characteristics of the opposite of the other one. There's probably very few of us who are 100% pure science or pure engineering. There's a lot of crossover, especially in rather applied or solutions-oriented fields like CDR.
Samara, do you feel like you oftentimes end up doing science even though you're an engineer?
Well, I was actually thinking about this when like we got the invitation for the podcast. Sometimes when we encounter some very like vague definitions in the methodologies, for instance, and that leaves a space for the certification team to define what should be done by the project, is when we actually need to do some sort of research, like very a mini applied science. And one example that I could give about that one is because like now we're having very long discussions about how we should implement leakage assessment in all our biochar projects, right? So the leakage assessment is so broad, and it should be, because it can vary depending on where the project is located, what they're doing, and so on. And on the operational side, we need to provide guidance to the developers on how to do that assessment well. And because of that, we also need to do the assessment to provide guidelines and to provide guidance, right? So it's something that we really apply, I think, science is when analyzing those leakage assessments. And one thing that I find and that I found particularly interesting about this science application is that we had like very long discussions with science actually about how we should conduct it. So it was super nice way of sharing like how we could apply the scientific knowledge to the certification of those projects.
Erica, do you end up doing some engineering or not really?
I mean, doing engineering, what does that mean? I think I use an engineering mindset or approach sometimes. No, more than sometimes. Yeah, quite often. I think that's one of the unique things we try to make sure we do at Rainbow, is that when we, so me on the science side, on the science team, a lot of the day-to-day work means like working on our methodologies, making methodologies, revising them, creating requirements. And I think I kind of use this engineering
mindset or solutions-oriented, practical, moving things forward mindset. When finding the balance in where to set our requirements. Like, it's a long process from, tackling a new technology, learning about it, writing the methodology, making decisions, setting requirements, and then starting to work with Samara and the certification team full of engineers to implement it and get the methodology live, set up questions for project developers to respond to. And if I, on the science side, at step one, creating these requirements, I'm not thinking in a little bit of the engineering mindset, and I'm not thinking about how to make this practical or what's this going to look like, how are the project developers going to use it, how is the certification team going to use it even, is this going to be feasible? Then I will probably end up making a mess for Samara and the certification team and the engineers. I think you have to have those, it's better to have those constraints and concerns in mind and balancing those with the scientific needs when making the methodologies. Even though that's usually put in the role of the science team and science work.
Why do we have this idea that scientists don't really care about real world application and they're detached from operationalizing anything? I feel like I work with a lot of scientists. Granted, it's mostly in carbon removal, and the kinds of jobs that are available and the kinds of people that it attracts are probably not the purely theoretical scientists, but people who actually want to have some more immediate impact in the world, rather than waiting for the downstream effects of the article that you write that gets cited 1,000 times and leads to a new fusion reactor or something like that. But that isn't everyone, and certainly not everyone in science. So why do we just have this idea in our head that there's one way to be a scientist, and it basically maps to nothing in carbon removal? And also, I'm very open to the fact that I am projecting out from my own experience and false understanding of what it means to be a scientist as a non-scientist, and that I'm creating the myth that I'm trying to debunk at the same time.
Yeah, I think it comes from the caricature that we have of scientists, or just the common image that we have of scientists in society. Scientists in TV shows are always the stereotypical person in a lab coat, detached.
You know who I thought of? This is like the worst example possible, but it's Gene Wilder in Young Frankenstein, which is not.
Yeah.
Is that who you want to be? I could have chose like Einstein or someone instead. It's that.
Yeah.
Okay, Frankenstein. Sorry, but yes, continue.
Yeah. I think it's just, from the scientist side, I would argue that the useless stereotype is, not useless, but imprecise stereotype is also true on the other side. Like, you say engineer, and I think someone who drives a train. Okay, that's what you think when you're a child, but you grow up, and then think, okay, engineers are the ones designing bridges.
That trains go over. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
To my family, I'm a calculator.
Yeah.
Calculator. Okay. Please continue though, Erica. That's good.
Yeah. That's it. I think these stereotypes just come from people who are not familiar with the field, needing to make a simple mental model of what does a scientist look like? What does an engineer look like? What do they do? And they're kind of the most, I don't know if they're even the most common examples. I would argue that most people who are scientists, which if we're defining that as people who have PhDs, which is a decent shorthand for how we could define a scientist, I would just think that most people who have PhDs are not actively working in academia, it could still be the people doing experiments in a lab coat, but, I don't know how many of the scientists out there meet this stereotypical image of people in theoretical, fundamental research, trying to understand the really knowledge that's really upstream from a solution, like in the long chain of research of making a first discovery, getting an idea, testing it all the way down to a solution. We probably think of scientists as only being the ones who are really, really far upstream in that chain of events. And that is reserved for something I would call more like the fundamental scientists. And there's a huge category of applied scientists, and then the spectrum gets a little blurry from there as science merges with engineering and it gets deployed.
What do you think, Miss Calculator? Do you agree with that? And what are you working with as an engineer too? I imagine you have your own stereotypes. People probably think you're a boring nerd, and a different kind of boring nerd too.
Yeah.
You're not, but they probably think that.
No, yeah, exactly. I think that people see engineers as like highly logical person, like a very detailed oriented person with great math skills, but often not really good at creative skills or at like interpersonal skills. Like maybe someone who can, as like Erica mentioned, like build a bridge that can repair anything, but would struggle to maybe communicate. I think that this is like the biggest stereotype that we could see. But in reality, like engineers are so diverse and can work with like teams, clients, managing projects, which is what we do at Rainbow in the operations team, and use our like creativity as much as we could use our logic, like to communicate with people and in a way that actually makes things easier and allows to, implement the knowledge we have to solve real problems.
I imagine a fair amount of innovation comes out of engineering as well,
Yeah.
taking an idea that is a bit more abstract and then trying to build it in the real world. I don't know how you could possibly measure the amount of innovation that takes place at which layer, but I imagine a huge amount gets learned just from trying to operationalize literally anything, right? Like engineering must be driving a lot of the learning as much
Yeah.
as the science too.
Yeah, exactly. Like it could be a huge innovation, but it could also make all the difference in a very, very small thing and like a very detailed thing, is knowing when to ask the right question. Like having a very good picture of the overall processes, but also understanding each and every piece of a flow, like a detail, and asking the right thing, the right question to make things work.
I would add maybe that definitely engineers through their iteration and like on the ground experience definitely come to new innovations and solutions, but maybe the science role would be the only one. I hesitate to say only because we're going to think of exceptions, but probably the only one that would come up with new, like deeper understanding of why those innovations work, maybe. And so, the engineers will try things, figure out what works, what doesn't, but maybe not discover the underlying mechanisms of what is making this work or not.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe one incorrect but useful model to understand the difference here is Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he talks about the difference between people, philosophy of science book. There are certain types of scientists who make paradigm reorienting kinds of discoveries, something like Newtonian physics going into relativity. Like it doesn't happen that often, but when you do, it totally reorganizes the systems of knowledge that exist. But most science also takes place at what he calls normal science, which is just like the small stepwise improvements of what we know within that paradigm. And if you wanted to apply it to science versus engineering, you would say something like science is working at the paradigm defining level and engineering is normal science. That's too fine of a point to put on it, though, because they are informing each other, and plenty of science takes place much below that. Erica, have you redefined the system of world knowledge that exists in your scientific work? My guess is you probably did more work on the normal science level because there's not that many people who reinvent the world, I think, right? So, like, is this even a useful thing to say?
I wish I made a paradigm shifting discovery. No way. No.
Nobel probably if you did.
No, I made a little inch or centimeter forward in my field of study.
Yeah, which is totally important work. It's hard to even say that without it sounding pejorative a little bit, of just like inherently hierarchical, where you're like, well, there's paradigm science and then there's normal science. And then there's like something about that just sounds like it's like a little inherently insulting for framing, maybe. I don't I don't
Yeah,
mean it that way. Because
very
the world
true.
is built of marginal improvements. Like that is often what is making our world, like has your world been improved that much by general and special relativity being discovered? My guess is maybe in some ways, maybe like, cool, quantum computing is now a thing, and like, okay, our nature of time, and maybe the movie Contact makes a little bit more sense. But like besides that, like I think a lot of the smaller incremental changes, eking out an extra 4% efficiency on a motherboard, those kinds of changes I think are really driving a lot of world innovation. And disagree if you want.
No, that's totally true. And I think a lot of scientists are probably happy with their small contribution to incremental change because small contributions are probably modest and safe, and be kind of skeptical or critical of big changes. I mean, we are as they happen in real time. It's pretty rare that you're like witnessing such a paradigm change, but as they happen, the scientists will be like the last ones to accept it, maybe because we want to be so critical and hesitant of such changes. So no, I'm cool with. I think I speak for scientists when I say we're cool with incremental small
I'm
change.
going to speak for the entire class of people. I did a show, gosh, it's been more than a year ago, but on philosophy of science. And we read that book, and then we read a Feyerabend book about sort of like anarchistic epistemology in science. And scientists do resist changes in paradigm, actually quite vociferously. They do not want them to, because they built their whole lives oftentimes working within a paradigm that if you upend it, it's like, cool, that knowledge is now, it's like if you were doing research on the 4 elements when there was only 4 elements, and then you're like, uh-oh, now there's a periodic table, and now my work is irrelevant and outmoded. One of the examples that I remember so strongly is that the Ptolemaic system of how the solar system operates allowed people to make fairly accurate predictions of planetary movements, except for when things would go into retrograde for like a small period of time. But like with that one exception, it like still worked pretty well. Obviously, geocentrism is still true. There's a couple things that work out, like with the retrograde cycling, but besides that, it's fine. And it took a long time for that actually to happen. So it's funny to think of scientists as people who are guided purely by the pursuit of knowledge also face their own egoic, personal resistance to change in this way. Like it doesn't even work like that anyways. Like scientists are also bought into a mental map of the world that when you challenge it, they react probably as strongly as anyone else when you challenge their model of the world.
Yeah, if you're an expert in that domain and it's challenged, then it's fair. You're probably one of the people who are best positioned to challenge such paradigm shifts. And we need people to, hold their ground and challenge such large changes. But it probably makes it even more difficult to come around to the changes and accept them when you have such deep knowledge in, the other way or the conventional way.
I'm trying to think if something like this even happens in engineering to the same extent. One example I can think of is maybe how concrete changed architecture. Like that seems like more of an engineering kind of example where you're like, cool, we can do rounded shapes now. It doesn't have to be rectilinear everything. And there was people who resisted that and fought back. And you think back to something like John Ruskin and the arts and crafts movement and being like, no on concrete, we like natural materials. We're not going to do it this way. But are there examples of big paradigm challenging, people resistant to change ideas within engineering that I just don't have the expertise to know about?
Well, I don't think I can say something like straightforward like that, but I'd say that engineers are usually so focused on the logic of things that they and the math of how things work that they're kind of hard to make them change their ideas. I'd say so because it's like a more objective way of seeing things in general. Like it's the stereotype of a engineer. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, like, let's change the shape of buildings. It's like, okay, that's the problem. We need to solve that problem. How will we solve it? At the end of the day, it ends like that, I'd say. But engineering is less of how science would work, I think. because things are more fixed. I mean, we can work with improvements like, yeah, there's a new material. How are we going to use that? How are we implementing it? But then there is not, it's more carré, as we say in French, like it's more in a box.
I think of the personality types or professions that I mix with the least successfully. I think engineering is the most. Everything I just said, I think to many engineers, they'd be like, who gives a crap about everything you just said? Like force equals mass times acceleration. I need to calculate like whether this pillar in a bridge can support the weight distributed over the top of it. Why are you talking about epistemology? What does this have to do with me? I think that's, is that a stereotype? Is that even the true thing? Are engineers wanting to hang out on that like freaky theoretical level?
I think it can be both, but it would be more like a stereotype, I think, because I mean, as I said, like engineers have such a variety of backgrounds, of like personalities. And I mean, we could use our creativity to change things as well to, like, why are we going to make a square shape foundation where we can make it circular or...
Okay, I'm going to summarize a little bit. Much of what you're saying sounds like your training, your professions are closer than they are distant, and many of these skills overlap, and much of the training does, and they're often quite complementary. Is there a bigger distance between engineering and science and then between commercial? I feel like maybe the gap is more on that side, and you two are maybe two peas in a pod. And I've certainly been in cases where I've seen product teams, science teams come up with a way of doing things that were very logical and would likely work, but also commercials like, who wants this thing? Like, this is engineered for a customer which does not exist. Why have we done it this way? This hurts the unit cost. You added this much precision to it, but it also raises the cost of verifying this by some amount that hurts the margin. This does not hit the targets correctly. I've seen conflict on that direction too. Is the gap there maybe bigger than it is between each of your two professions?
I would say that this gap might be bigger between science and commercial than between operations and commercial.
Oh, okay. Tell me.
I'd say that we in the like working in the operations team, we are at the center of everything that happens at the company, right? At Rainbow. So we take everything that science made and we apply it, but we are also in constant touch with the commercial team to deliver the credits, to deliver the projects, and in constant contact with them to understand their needs, like if there is a offset agreement and then we need to go faster within like a given project and so on. And because of that, and because we deal a lot with project developers, we understand their challenges. And when, for instance, like, for example, it is way better to have as many laboratory tests for a given biochar production batch we can to improve the certainty of it. But at the end of the day, it increases costs for the developer, and I know that. So then if science defines a given requirement to provide, I don't know, Y amount of samples, of lab samples, we would know that this wouldn't work because it would be more expensive on the project developer side. So then we would go back to science and say, hey, this will not work because, yeah, it costs like at least 600 euros to send a sample from Africa to Europe, like to a lab. So then we need to go back, we need to change this. So I think that we have more of this commercial mindset as well. Erica, what do you think?
I'm waiting. I want the counterattack. Keep in here, Erica.
Oh, Samara and I are usually aligned, unfortunately for you. But yeah, I think Samara changed my mind. I was going to say that, no, of course, we're so aligned. We're much closer between science and engineering than with commercial. That's why we're all lumped together in STEM, which is like a huge and useful category. We clearly share some deep foundations there, which is just like technical topics, I guess. So yeah, we definitely, in our like discipline and approach, I want to say that, yeah, we come from roots that are more similar, but then maybe you throw us into the real world and we start to diverge a bit, and our engineers who, yeah, are more close to the field, close to the real world solutions, are more sympathetic to like the same concerns that the commercial team would have. And on the science side, again, from my perspective of like methodology development, on the one hand, I kind of try to keep a bit of distance from commercial. Like, I don't want to be too influenced by them. I don't want to hear them talking about, oh, like we could, sign this project if only we loosened this requirement. Like, I don't want to know that, and we don't have those conversations. So in real world or in like the operation of a standard, science definitely is a bit more distant from commercial, and maybe engineering operations, Samara, are our go-between when, we really need to get down to figuring out, like, is this requirement really not usable? For example, I mean, we try to investigate that up front when we're, developing a methodology. We have lots of interviews with project developers, asking them what kind of requirements sound feasible or not. But we maybe can't anticipate everything. We discover a lot of things through iterations, through project certification, as Samara works on. So we, definitely interface then with operations and engineers to get a better idea of what is feasible or what is maybe desirable, rather than getting that information from commercial.
Samara, is that pretty much how you see it? Are you a little bit of a bridge while trying to protect science's separation?
I think we're really like in between. Like we're literally the bridge that bridges like this entire gap. But it's not because we have like a shorter gap with the commercial side that we leave like the science behind, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like we are always trying to keep this balance between like keeping the scientific rigor while being like agile in whatever we do.
Seems like a good balance. And commercial has its own stereotype here too. And I've seen it be both true and be false. The stereotype of commercial that's true is having a very aggressive salesperson who will get off a call and then go into leadership or the product team and be like, hey, I just got off a call. I told them that we could do this feature or make this kind of credit. When can we do that? And the engineering, science, product team, whoever's responsible for this being like, yeah, that's not what we do. Also, that violates several things that we just do not do. And why did you tell this person that you're going to do it? It's like, well, I could make the sale in the room. Like I was going to get us to the next thing. And you're like way far out ahead of your skis on either scientific and or ethical grounds. I've seen that be true, by the way. That is not just a stereotype. And I guess that's the thing about stereotypes is sometimes there's enough truth in there where they can be useful models professionally. Be like, okay, that is part of the intellectual heritage of a role like this. But some of the best salespeople I've seen have also been extremely talented listeners, very patient, very good at understanding people, making sure they get what they want. It isn't just smile and dial and you are trying to just like, get people on the phone and like force a product down their throat that they don't want, or like lying and just like trying to get something done even though it doesn't make any sense. That being said, oh, go ahead, react.
And I think we could also maybe flip it the other way around of, how would commercial like leverage us to make decisions? For example, sometimes talking about kind of strategy decisions, where should we go? What's the market like? What do we see? We get the privilege of talking to lots of different people in the market. So we have these discussions sometimes, kind of big picture, where to go. And the science in me the scientist in me says like, well, why are we just talking about it? Let's go run some surveys. Let's get some data. Let's make a data-driven decision, which is not necessarily how commercial or strategy works. So there's probably friction going in both ways.
No, I love that. Oh, Samara.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I was just going to compliment that. Usually, like the commercial side, they want things very, very much fast. Like, hey, we just have this project within like this given methodology. When it's going to be ready? Erica, please let us know. We need it for yesterday. And yeah, that's tough to balance sometimes.
Without a doubt it is. I think the example especially that you gave, Erica, is how it should work at a well-functioning team, because all of these ways of seeing the world, interacting with it, have their things that they're super powered at and their blind spots. And you need to have some amount of teamwork here to balance between the best and the worst parts of your professional abilities and like what you're able to see and operationalize or not. And I think when teams are good at that, like for instance, I work on primarily on the commercial side, commercial strategy, storytelling, product marketing. And marketing, the bad version of marketing is the smart people of the company build something and then the marketers figure out how to tell it to people. And that's literally the worst way to use a marketer. That's like the lowest level way to use a marketer, if that is what happens. One of the better ways to use a marketer is to have them at the product level be embedded and figure out like, okay, what are features that we could create or strategic changes we could make to the company that would make what we're doing much more able to be marketed, much more attractive naturally for organic storytelling, that would make the product more saleable, and that would improve our margins on the product. So like, that being said though, I can even think of a counterexample of this where there was a blog post from Charm that came out a few months ago. Peter Reinhardt's thing is often like the best way to improve is to cut scope and to cut the amount of things that you're doing. And they're always trying to simplify at Charm. That's like a big thing that he's been on the thought leadership rounds for a long time on. I think it's like really smart advice because people tend to put a hat on a hat, as the expression goes, and like keep adding stuff. And it doesn't necessarily help as much as cutting can. I was talking to someone else who works in the space and they were like, I hated this blog post. All they said is that they're going to sample less. Like, why is that like cool cutting of scope? Like, what if we needed that? Like, why is it just a race to the bottom? And so who's right? The person that's worried that this is a race to the bottom, or the fact that we need to operationalize lower cost ways of getting to a similar amount of quality? And I'm sure that there's good reasons for Charm to think this extra sample doesn't help as much as it costs, and therefore there's good reasons to cut. But also you have to know on a macro level, there is a really strong race to the bottom dynamic within carbon markets and carbon crediting that we are all at risk of cutting good science and good quality because it makes the commercial case better. And by doing that, you're creating a very large risk at some point that there's a bank run and things collapse because everyone has done this to such an extent that eventually the whole house of cards comes down. And how do you know which of those that it is exactly? Holy crap, how are you going to answer that? I don't even know if there's a question in there. There's like 16 observations. So good luck to each of you.
Man, small observation. I hope that they, made such a decision with a, data-driven approach, looking at.
I have no reason to think that they didn't, by the way. Like
looking at the diminishing returns of each sample. Yeah. I mean, that's a valid conversation that I wish we could be more open about when, for me, like setting requirements, writing a methodology. I often ask project developers as we're developing requirements, how much does this sample cost? What is your break even? Like, what margin do you really have?
Well, is that really your job though, Erica? Is that really your place to do that?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I don't always get great answers. And so I don't always like rigorously account for that in the methodology. But that's what I'm saying. I wish that that's something that we could take an honest look at and be more transparent about. It's difficult because it gets into the project developers' operational data, their business plan, cost structure. Maybe they don't even know at that point what is the cost of all their sampling. But that would be the ideal way, in my opinion, to balance, on the one side, what the scientific evidence and underlying knowledge of the topic says we need, which usually is a very, very, very high bar. And oftentimes we can implement that. in projects in MRV, but sometimes we really struggle with that. For example, like enhanced rock weathering, where we're having a tough time figuring out what exactly is going to work, what's going to be commercially viable, how much can we ask for when you're looking at massive deployments across thousands of hectares of how many samples do you need? I mean, we always talk about it's a balance of the scientific rigor and the operational feasibility. And I wish that was, when talking about operational feasibility, we could have a more data-driven approach to these diminishing returns on, for example, taking more samples, cost benefit of reducing uncertainty versus how much it costs to get those extra samples.
Yeah, but analyzing the uncertainty is also something that you do when developing the methodology. So it's something that you kind of already know a little bit beforehand, how this will impact and how like we can give up on a certain given precise data based on the returns that it will provide us based on this uncertainty. So I think this is actually very useful in the, something that science does that it's very useful in the operational side as well. And when we certify like our first projects, for instance, is also when we can refine this, like the type of information that they can provide us. If we can ask for more, if we should ask for less, because it doesn't really make much difference at the end of the day.
Yes, I sided more on Charm's side after having that happen. I thought it was a really courageous thing to say because one of the things I think we're all sick of hearing in carbon removal is how important quality is, and everyone's saying it all the time. Yeah, you're like table stakes. Yeah, okay, fine. But not to keep referencing podcasts that I've made in the past. Everyone should go listen to every podcast I've ever done, so I never have to say this ever again. But there's a show I did last year about how I have an economist friend, and like a decade ago, he told me that the optimal number of travel deaths is non-zero. Like we could all drive cars that go 10 miles an hour, but we've all collectively decided that that is just not worth it. We're willing to accept some amount of risk to get where we're going much more quickly. And carbon removal has a hard time grappling with this because what actually is the correct line? There's no non-arbitrary line. It's going to be mapped on a curve somewhere of being like this amount of risk, this amount of trust in this credit is worth this price. And you can keep adding, you can go to 1 mile an hour if you want. And basically nothing bad is ever going to happen, but is it worth the price that you pay for it? And I think with quality, people forget how much quality costs. And at some point, I think the curve starts pointing much more vertically. And you're like, cool, for an extra unit of quality, it costs you 20 units of economics, as opposed to like getting you to the 80-20 in the first place. Might be good enough or might do a lot of the work.
And sometimes it's probably worth just taking a cut. If you're talking about the last % of accuracy, if it results in like underestimating credits by taking a conservative cut, probably a lot of project developers would rather take that route. And I would feel okay with it to a certain extent, as long as we're not overissuing credits. Yeah. Maybe a bit of an engineering take on it.
I'm leaving space to hear more of that too. Yeah. Tell me.
But yeah, I totally agree. Like sometimes when if it actually happens, not quite often, but sometimes, if the developer doesn't have like a precise data point that we really need and we need to take a decision, it's either you get certified using a very conservative assumption, either you don't get certified at all. We will probably go for the first option, where we define what is the best assumption to take, analyze the uncertainties of it, apply like a discount factor, for instance, and probably underestimate the amount of credits that they will get at the end of the day. So it will cost them money anyway, but it will probably cost less.
Yeah, it's hard because in carbon removals and in carbon markets, I feel like we're balancing two extreme and really valuable constraints. Like on the one hand, the climate urgency and the fact that we all really want to get things going and figure this out and start tackling these existential issues. But on the other side, we're constrained by trust and scandal issues in carbon markets. And it's hard to thread the needle. I don't know if you could call it threading the needle when it's like two such faraway extremes, but yeah, how to balance both of those, like existential threats to carbon removal, even, if we go too far on the move fast and take conservative discounts and just make it work, then we risk shooting ourselves in the foot and at least risk, weakening carbon markets as such a promising way to finance and grow carbon removal, which would, nobody wants that. So it's really hard to balance between those two constraints.
That's what I was going to ask about, is how do you know you're doing this for the right reasons? Because there's also competitive pressures where project developers might shop their projects around and be like, who's going to give me the most credits? Who's going to be the easiest to work with? And that doesn't necessarily always lead to higher quality. There's a tendency to be like, oh, well, this expensive, kind of annoying process, a different registry is not making them do, so they're going to go over there. And that is an incentive that one doesn't have to respond to, but someone might, given enough time, given enough registries, like someone might offer them the exact kind of package that they're looking for. And how do you make sure you're doing it for a reason of, oh, this last marginal test we're asking for only improves accuracy a very small amount and it costs way too much and therefore isn't worth it? And how do you know you're not doing it because, oh, we're going to lose this deal if we don't do something that's going to harm quality or increase uncertainty by a lot?
That's like
hard question.
That's like the ultimate question.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Make those decisions on requirements. Where do we want to place our level of rigor? Again, we talk so much about rigor in carbon markets, like quality, and if we were being the most rigorous, then nothing would ever happen. So, we all take into account reality in most of these requirements and are not 100% the most rigorous. So it's a daily struggle deciding where to place it. It's informed by, for example, what is the sensitivity of the outcome to this decision, which is just, a way of saying like, how important is it? Some things, if we're, like we were talking about, if adding this requirement would make a very small marginal change, then it probably could be excluded. We then weigh that with how difficult is it to meet this requirement or provide this extra data point or provide this proof. And, I often see it as a quadrant of like how important is the thing, how sensitive is the outcome to it, and also how difficult is it to obtain more information. So if it's, low sensitivity, but low difficulty, like easy to get, then we'll say, yeah, sure, okay, we can require that, or we can recommend it, but it doesn't really matter too much either way. The, of course, worst case scenario is things that are really sensitive, really important, but also really hard to get. And that's where we spend most of the uncomfortable time making the tough decisions, where we probably just go talk to more people, really, and get more information to continue working through it.
Yeah, to what Erica mentioned, I would also add what are the risks of the choice that we are making as well. And on our, one thing that I really like about how we do things is that we are not really, of course, like sales team, please don't hear me saying that, but we are not really like concerned about saying, oh, this project is not really eligible anymore. Yeah. If we keep the highest bar that we can. Like, one example that I could give, for instance, was for, we made this, like, coming back to the leakage again. We made this leakage assessment where we decided, based on the research that we made, that a discount factor should be applied to that project. So then they would have like less credits. They would not be happy. And then we were like, okay, are we actually going to do this like but we know it's the right thing to do. We know it's what the methodology says. We know that this will increase by a lot the quality of the credits. So, okay, let's do this. Even if we knew that the project would not be happy, it was also good for them, like, because their credits would meet like a highest bar.
Samara and Erica, thanks so much for being on. Really respect how transparent you are about showing your work and your thinking around these. These are questions that everyone in the space faces. All of these tensions exist in basically every company, and all of these personality types and professions probably also exist at all these companies. So I'm hoping this is a fairly universal show and people can catch glimpses of themselves and their own companies in doing this. But I respect that you were able to engage with some of these ideas so openly, because they are, what did you say, Erica? The ultimate question? Yeah, they're right to the fundament. Sorry, that's the work, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. For interesting stuff.
Thank you so much, Ross. Very nice.